headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
This war seems to be starting almost by stealth, insofar as the last couple of days Putin has recognized two eastern regions as independent. So these were areas of the Ukraine where there are a lot of Russian people living there. So he said they're independent, and now it looks as if he's rolled tanks in what he calls a peacekeeping mission. So really, if they are Russian tanks, because the tanks that have been seen so far are unmarked, but if they are Russian tanks, then this essentially is the beginning of the invasion, and yet it is not being called that. Boris Johnson's going to make a statement to the Commons later this morning, around about 12:30. But clearly, I think the international community considers that it may now have started. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the whole situation is very concerning. It's alarming. I think it's entirely predictable. You have to remember that Putin is a very bitter old man. He's 70 years old. He cannot believe the USSR is not the country it once was. Remember, he was a former KGB agent. And I think Putin is playing the West. I mean, this is entirely choreographed. It's actually been incredibly stage managed very, very well indeed. He's made France look like a laughingstock. I think he's tested Western resolve. And actually, I think he's done an incredibly good job in terms of disinformation and the media propaganda war.
Indeed. But is this, given that he has, I think we can assume that those tanks that have been spotted in these two disputed regions are Russian. Given that that's now happened, is it now time for the international community to begin those serious sanctions that we've been threatening for months?
Yeah, absolutely. So we believe there's something like 150,000 to 190,000 tanks that are amassing on that border. And there's no doubt he's got past form, remember. In 2008, he said he was going to withdraw his troops and then invaded a few days later. I think there is, I mean, actually, if you looked at what happened yesterday, he sort of choreographed it by having the leaders of those regions who were sitting there. He listened to the evidence. But what were the two leaders doing in the Kremlin in the first place? Entirely choreographed. He then signed that document that formally recognized Donetsk and Luhansk. And of course, by doing that, he is also then saying that actually Russia is listening to what he believes are going to be pro-Russian states, that Russia is actually not the bully here, but is actually being bullied by Ukraine, these false flag events, and basically essentially saying that the Russian citizens in those regions are under attack from Ukraine. And it is simply not true. And I think the West has to be very clear. And we at Reform UK are very clear that we want shock and awe sanctions against Russia implemented as soon as possible. You have to hit Putin very, very hard. You have to hit his friends very hard. And remember, of course, Putin's only there because his oligarch friends think he's useful. The minute he's not useful, he would be out. We need to get rid of those golden visas, which the government has said it is doing. And of course, the one thing that no one is talking about is why on earth are we so obsessed with Russian energy? This is a disaster. We need to be energy sufficient, and Nord Stream 2 has to stop.
Indeed. So what we mustn't let Putin get away with, I think in your view, is this sort of invasion that he's pretending isn't an invasion. The fact is he's now rolled into Ukraine, and we should take that as a declaration of war, shouldn't we?
I think we should, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think we need to watch the next few hours, but clearly he's broken the Minsk protocol, which the idea of that was to have a ceasefire and to ensure that this didn't happen. And of course, if you look at the geographical map, you've got to remember you've got an incredibly complicated geopolitical map. So you've got obviously Ukraine, Belarus, which is clearly aligned with Russia, and then sitting alongside are countries that are going to be very vulnerable indeed. So Poland, you've also got Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia, and these countries need to be protected by the European Union. And I thought actually Macron was trying to have the upper hand and trying to show that he was a world diplomat, and it's all gone horribly wrong. I think one of the other things it's shown is just how disunited the United States of Europe really is.
Yeah, and including America, where Joe Biden's response has been fairly feeble so far. He should be leading the free world, but doesn't quite seem to know what he's doing. We have to decide, I think, in the West today. We'll find out what the Prime Minister's thinking at 12:30, but we have to decide what this action means. The fact that he made these two disputed regions independent, or recognised their independence, and the next thing we knew, there are tanks rolling into the country. What does this mean? And I think we have to interpret that in the most severe terms.
Well, I think you also just have to look at it in historical terms. This is the most significant and the biggest military mobilization since the Second World War. And if that doesn't tell you what you should be doing, I don't know what does.
Indeed, it's a very worrying prospect, but we mustn't be conned by this guy. Otherwise, he'll just kind of roll all the way to Kiev, saying he's on a peacekeeping mission.
Yeah. Actually, I do think that, if you look back at the sanctions that have been imposed before, they sort of ranked at about 3 out of 10. So we need to make sure that the sanctions that we go in with as an international community really hurt. And I think what you're going to see is a lot of wealthy Russians in London squealing and squirming, and they won't like it. And they will then apply pressure to Putin. So I think they could be a window of opportunity. But I think the sanctions need to come in sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so as I say, we're on the edge of our seats for 12:30 when the Prime Minister will make us privy to his thoughts on the situation. Presumably he will have talked to Biden, Macron, etc. So some sort of united display of opposition to Putin, I think, is probably called for today. We await events with interest. Obviously, Talk Radio will keep you all up to speed with this developing story throughout the day. Let's come back home, if you like, David. So we've got Freedom Day on Thursday. Before we get to last night's rather strange press briefing, I thought, your thoughts, as a doctor as well as a politician, about Boris basically lifting all restrictions on Thursday. I think it's the right thing to do. Millions of others do. But then again, cheerleaded by Keir Starmer, millions of people think it's a terrifying prospect.
Well, I think the thing the government's done really well is terrify people, and it is the right move. We have moved, as I've said to you on many occasions, from being a pandemic to being endemic. We have to learn to live with this virus. And I think dropping these restrictions is absolutely the right thing to do. In fact, on Saturday night, I interviewed various doctors who are totally against relaxation of these restrictions. But of course, when you talk to people like Whitty and Valens, they're seeing it entirely from a scientific viewpoint. They don't see the businesses destroyed. They don't see the mental health impact that these lockdowns have had. We've talked about the fact that lockdowns actually achieved very little apart from that first one. So I think it is absolutely right. In terms of the test and trace, that was one of the biggest wastes of money that government has ever managed in its entire history. And then you're looking at the lateral flow tests. Well, they cost another £2 billion a month. Now, I think £24 billion would be better spent clearing the backlog of 6 million elective procedures that we have at the moment. And that is threatened to rise to as high as 12 million. We need to get on, treat the 40,000 people who haven't started cancer therapy. Do you know, in hospital at the moment, you still cannot visit a patient. You can have one visitor. And I think that is shocking. It's disgraceful. 25% of NHS trusts will not allow any visitors. And I think they need to remember who pays their salaries.
Very well said. I'm going to pay heed to someone who sent me a text saying, what about the rest of the country? It's all about England, isn't it? And it's a good point, because we're talking, Freedom Day Thursday, he lifts all the restrictions. Only in England. What about the people who live in Wales, Northern Ireland, and of course Scotland? Will they follow suit soon? Because this will make this divided country of ours seem more divided than ever.
Well, I think what it shows is, for me, that devolution really doesn't work when you come to matters of national interest. And so if you live in Wales, for example, and you still have restrictions, but you work in England, what does that mean? Can you still go in? If you get a positive test, whilst you are encouraged to self-isolate, do you have to? Well, I think the answer is probably not, because you are working in England, but you live in Wales. So therefore, the Welsh government would say you had to. So you're going to have huge problems, I think, going forward. I think you just need to realise that we as a United Kingdom are a relatively small country. We've got 68 million people. The vast majority live in England. And I think the union needs to move as one.
Now, let's move to last night's Downing Street press briefing. I've always thought they're strange affairs. There's something kind of weirdly Eastern Bloc about them. You know, here's our dear leader, a lot of flags behind him and two experts flanking him on either side. But last night's, it was an attempt at a show of unity. But I thought the Prime Minister was delivering a different message to the other two. The Prime Minister was saying it is, and you and I think, agree with him, it is time to learn to live with COVID. The other two, I think, were basically saying it's time to learn to live in terror of COVID forever.
Yeah, well,
forever. The Project Fear, as far as those two are concerned, is still very much in play, isn't it?
Well, I think if they don't have Project Fear, they don't have a job, do they? I don't know this, but I'm assuming they're enjoying the limelight. I think the thing is that there is an element of political expediency here as well, because remember, he wasn't going to remove these restrictions for another month. He's clearly in big trouble over Partygate. The backbenchers all came back to Parliament yesterday. It was the first day back, and he wanted to deliver some good news. And he's hoping that by doing that a lot of his domestic woes will disappear. At the same time, he's been the international statesman in Ukraine. And so therefore, actually, what it does very nicely for Boris Johnson is move the agenda on.
Yeah.
But having said that, actually, I do think it's right that we remove the restrictions. Looking at the latest numbers, another fall of 25% in cases, hospitalizations down 15%. And deaths down 20%. In fact, if you look at the mortality for this time of year, it is lower than it is at many other years preceding this. So actually, I think we have to learn to live with COVID. I'm visiting a relative in hospital at the moment. I have to test every single day for COVID. Do I have to test for flu? I'd argue that's a far bigger danger to inpatients than COVID.
What were Whitty and Valence effectively saying? I mean, in view of what you're saying, the statistics are plummeting everywhere. In 95% of the entire country, COVID cases, the number of COVID cases are plummeting. The number of deaths yesterday, admittedly it's a Monday where the tally tends to be low, was 15. So given all of these statistics and given the fact that we've all known, took the authorities a while to catch up, but we've all known since early December that Omicron was a mild variant that only makes you slightly ill for a couple of days. Even Whitty and Valance are now grudgingly accepting that. But they stood there and said, well, yes, we've got a weak variant at the moment, but the next variant could be very strong. We just don't know. What on earth, if they don't know, why are they standing there saying that sort of fear-mongering stuff?
I don't know. I do think that when you are a true scientist, you can only see things through the prism of zero risk. And life isn't like that. Life isn't about zero risk. You have to measure risk and monitor risk. And I think, as a politician, you have to weigh up science and you have to weigh up the logistics of real life. And that's what the scientists aren't doing. Look, Boris Johnson has not got an easy job doing this. But actually, the rollout of the vaccine in this country was extraordinary. British science was extraordinary. We're going to be the first country out of this terrible situation, and that's extraordinary. So I will cut him some slack on that. I'm hoping that as we relax the restrictions, that actually people don't go crazy. I hope there'll be a level of sort of responsibility, and that if you do test positive, that you do isolate. But equally, I understand we need to get businesses back. The centres of our cities are empty. Coffee shops are shut. Restaurants are shut. We need to reopen them. We need to get people back to work. We need the economy to thrive, because look, we've got inflation running at 5.5% or higher. We're seeing food prices spiraling out of control, and we need to get that under control. We need to get Britain back in business.
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.